If you're drafting a fantasy football team this year, this is the ultimate running back ranking video that will help you dominate your draft. Because I'll be ranking my top 36 running backs for fantasy football this year based on what actually matters. Now, if you're not familiar, I'm Sal Vetri. I've been helping people win their leagues for 8 years, and I'm here to do the same for you in this video, help you win your draft. And we'll begin in tier 1 with my first 4 running backs in the rankings, and in tier 1, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Christian McCaffrey. Really not a lot of shocking things here. I mean, Saquon Barkley, he led the league in carries, in rushing yards, had 2,300 total yards last year, continued to dominate from a touchdown and red zone perspective, despite his own quarterback having 14 rushing touchdowns. Now, we've showed this tweet before, but Saquon was the most dominant running back last year with runs of 10 plus yards, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 yards. He was as explosive as it got, and people want to say, oh, but he almost had 500 total touches. Is it his fault he was so good to become a workhorse and his team was so good that they got all the way into the Super Bowl? I'm not going to hold that against him. I think he gets another 300 to 350 plus touches. Now, the next running back in my rankings is Bijan Robinson, because this is a guy who last year from week 6 on, if we pull up RotoViz's game split tools right here, over those final 12 weeks, he pulled away from Tyler Algier in his backfield, and he started averaging 22.8 fantasy points per game. This led all running backs. He had top 3 usage when it came to rushing yards with almost 98 rushing yards per game, and also receiving production from a yards per route run standpoint. From a target share perspective, he was up there those final 12 weeks as like a borderline RB1 overall. And the thing Bijan has going for him, as you can see right here, he's just 23 and a half years old right now. So he kind of has everything. He has the balance of the receiving production like a Jahmyr Gibbs, the workhorse role like a Derrick Henry, but he's still younger than Saquon, than McCaffrey, than Henry, right? He does still have that youth on his side and the explosiveness. The one concern would be, is Michael Penix going to be good? He was good this final 3 games of last year when Bijan was averaging 2 touchdowns a game with Penix, but that was a small 3-game sample. That is the one concern why Bijan is in my RB1. And my RB3 in tier 3 is Jahmyr Gibbs, because I mean, this dude literally last year was the running back 2 in fantasy points per game, despite ranking 31st in opportunity share. He was the RB2, the number 2 running back in fantasy behind Saquon Barkley, despite splitting a backfield with David Montgomery, which is absolutely insane. But based off all the reports of this camp, it's looking like Gibbs is going to have a bigger role with the new offensive coordinator there. You could see Adam Levitan's tweet, despite the pass catching skills, Jahmyr Gibbs saw just 3.7 targets per game last year. But now you can see there's reports that are happening right here in the highlighted tweets. I believe this is from The Athletic. They've been saying, I've seen the Lions running back Gibbs start in the backfield, motion into the slot. I've seen him start in the slot lineup at running back. He's running wheel routes, Texas routes, quick slants, and more. All of that to say is these beat reporters who have been there the past couple of years when Gibbs has been there are now saying like he's seeing significantly more passing game usage. And as you can see from this report right here, this is from, I believe, Top 1 Fantasy on Instagram. They said Gibbs was getting much more reps with the first team offense in the early parts of camp than David Montgomery in the new John Morton offense with Ben Johnson not there. It was a 75-25 split in terms of distribution. That is jarring. I don't think he's going to see 75% of the snaps this year, but even if it goes from 55 to like 60 to 65, RB1 overall upside. And number 1 overall upside is what my RB4 has here in Christian McCaffrey in tier 1, because yes, 2024 was rocky. He was hurt, but now he's healthy. And let me remind you, in his last 4 healthy seasons, here's what McCaffrey averages: 350 touches per season, over 2,000 total yards per season, and 24 fantasy points per game. That's insane. 24.5 fantasy points per game is what he was averaging, which is like 2 to 3 points more than Saquon had last year in his amazing season. And of course, we know Christian McCaffrey is going to remain in a very good offense. And as you can see right here from Ian Hartit's tweet, Christian McCaffrey currently in terms of easiest running back schedules in the NFL is 3rd on the list for the 3rd easiest running back schedule. He doesn't have Debo, doesn't have Jordan Mason, Brandon Ayuk's hurt. The offense is going to once again run through Christian McCaffrey. Okay, so that does it for my tier 1 of running backs. Now let's get into tier 2, where it's my RB5 Ashton Jeanty, then 6 Derrick Henry, 7 Devon Achane, and 8 Jonathan Taylor. We'll start with Ashton Jeanty, because this is a guy last year who broke 106 tackles in college. He had 40 plus more broken tackles than any other dude. And if you follow college football, you know that he had a historic season. He led all running backs in college easily with over 2,600 rushing yards. He had 30 touchdowns. When you factor in his receiving yards of 138, this dude had over 2,700 total yards, leading the league in missed tackles, touchdowns, rushing yards, you name it. And now all the reports out of Raiders camp are that he's also getting involved as a pass catching running back, as a top 10 overall pick. You kind of expect him to be a 3-down back. And we're getting the reports like this almost every single day. Ashton Jeanty has been routing up Raiders defenders all training camp. His route running abilities and change of direction have reportedly been giving defenders hell through practices, which makes a lot of sense. He's been the most hyped up prospect probably since Saquon Barkley. So we're talking now like 6+ years in terms of the most anticipated running back coming out. I think the hype is real. You're going to see 350 plus touches this year. Now for my running back 6 and 7, Devon Achane and Derrick Henry. This one really depends on your league format. In a standard league, I prefer Henry. In a half-point PPR, I slightly prefer Henry. In a full PPR, I'd probably have Devon Achane slightly ahead, the guy who led all running backs in receptions last year. So we'll leave Derrick Henry as number 6 here, because this is a guy coming off of a a season where he led the NFL in explosive play rate. He had a career high in yards per carry. He was dominant. He had 1,900 total rushing yards. He was in the end zone nonstop in this Ravens offense. And now he remains the clear RB1 and the #1 ranked rushing offense last season in terms of yards overall per game. He has a mobile quarterback to take pressure off of him. Defenses will remain honest. They're going to be in positive game scripts. There's no competition. People are scared off by his age of 31, nearly 32 years old at some point this season. I'm going to say I'm not, because we didn't see anything fall off last year. And that can take us right into our RB7 if we're talking half PPR or standard formats here in De'Von Achane. And if it is PPR formats, okay, just flip these two guys. But Achane last year, and again, you've heard the stat, in 11 healthy games with Tua, this dude was averaging 22.6 fantasy points per game, the most out of any running back, more than Bijan, more than Gibbs, more than McCaffrey, of course, more than Saquon in the league. And according to the team changes tracker in my fantasy blueprint, you can check it out at jointheblueprint.com. You can see right here, Raheem Mostert's gone. Okay, that's going to open up some opportunities in terms of overall touches and touchdowns. But the big one is Jonnu Smith being gone. In terms of targets and opportunities, these two guys being gone, 192 total opportunities, 10 touchdowns are now gone, 111 targets alone away from Jonnu Smith, who is seeing these short area design targets, which now more than likely are going to give De'Von Achane some more usage. At the very worst, it'll give him a target and receiving floor, which is very important for running backs. I mean, this was a guy who already was averaging last season 4.6 receptions per game. His 78 catches led all running backs. He's a volume machine, not only on the ground from an explosiveness standpoint, earning touches, 12 to 15 per game on the ground, but now you're starting to see him get targets per game. Tua back in the offense, you're probably going to see more check down targets. Not the greatest offensive line, same offensive coordinator and play caller, Mike McDaniel, still there, so it looks like a situation where they should probably just run it back with Achane in the passing game, and obviously as the leading rusher. Which brings us to my running back 8 in Jonathan Taylor, because I mean, this guy, when he's healthy, he is great, even in bad offenses, and we saw it last year when he finally got healthy to end last season. Jonathan Taylor was an absolute force on offense. Those last 3 weeks of the season, your fantasy playoffs, yes, this is not a misread stat. He was averaging over 30 fantasy points per game and over 170 rushing yards per game, 2 touchdowns per contest during this time on average. I mean, we saw that 2021 form right here was the RB1 overall in fantasy, has dealt with injuries some of the last couple of seasons, but if he stays healthy, even in an offense where your quarterbacks are going to either be Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, this guy still has RB1 overall upside because he's that good of a pure runner. Now we get into tier 3, and we'll start it off with my running back 9 in Bucky Irving, who was an RB1 to end the season last year after the Bucks bye week. I mean, he ended up having 23 or more fantasy points in 3 of his final 6 games, and during that stretch was averaging over 17 fantasy points per contest. Now he heads into this season where everybody in the Bucks organization seems to be viewing him as a special enough talent to warrant a high volume RB1 role that includes pass catching work, because this is what we saw at the end of last year. Now again, this is not a 220 pound running back. This is like 180 to 190 pound running back. He's never going to see 350 touches in a season. He's probably never going to average 20 plus touches per game, but he didn't do that last year. He played less than 50% of the snaps and had over 1,500 yards. I'll just take that again. This is just a guy who knows how to create production per touch, yards per touch, both on the ground and as a receiver. So yeah, I'm not going to ignore that. Now for my running back 10, he is a top 10 running back for me, even though he went in round 10 of fantasy drafts last year. He paid that off for you in Chase Brown. This guy had 54 receptions last season in one of the most pass happy offenses. They still have a bad defense. Most likely they're still going to have to pass a lot this season. Chase Brown was dominant down the stretch last year, and I only expect that to continue this year. His offensive coordinator, Dan Pitcher, is already saying he wants to make Chase Brown a superstar this season. He's called him a focal point of the offense. He's compared him to Austin Eckler. If we get anything near this, and let me just remind you, Austin Eckler had 80 plus reception seasons, double-digit touchdown seasons. Like, if you start to get Chase Brown, even if you don't think he's the most efficient runner, neither was Joe Mixon in this Bengals offense, you start to see him getting 15, 16 carries a game and 4 to 5 catches a game. Yeah, the sky's the limit for this dude. The sky is the limit also for Josh Jacobs if he could remain healthy this year, coming off of a 300 touch season. He was a top 8 running back last year for the Packers with 16 touchdowns, and that's him not even scoring in the first 4 weeks of the season. He had 16 touchdowns over his final 13 games with Green Bay. And now he's in a situation where he basically has the same competition. Emmanuel Wilson and Christopher Brooks are there. We'll see if Marshawn Lloyd, the former 3rd round pick from last year, who's a big physical back, can play on 3rd downs, has a lot of size and speed. If he can stay healthy, he already has a groin injury in camp, though they're saying it's not serious. If indeed Marshawn Lloyd is healthy, I think he's a nice pick in like the final rounds of your fantasy drafts if you either wanted a handcuff or if you're in a deep league for like an 18th round pick or something like that. Overall, though, we've seen it now for like 6 years with Josh Jacobs. As long as he's going to get you most likely 280 touch season, if he's in a quality offense and not the terrible Raiders offense from 2 years ago, he's probably going to have a decent to great season. Which then takes us to my running back 12, and this is a guy who is now, yes, an RB1 for me and quickly becoming a 2nd round worthy pick in fantasy drafts, and that's Omarion Hampton, who last season in college was top 3 in rushing yards per game. This dude averaged 24 touches per game, and check this out. As you can see from my friend Austin's tweet over here on Twitter, you can see he says Hampton's averages over the last 2 seasons. This is not just over like one game. This is over 20 plus games in college. 24 24 touches per game, over 150 yards per game, and over 1 touchdown per contest. He checks all the boxes in terms of production, size, speed, and now he joins a backfield with the Chargers, as you can see right here in the team changes tracker, that doesn't have J.K. Dobbins, that doesn't have Gus Edwards. They added Najee Harris, but he has, as of this recording, not yet even taken place in a practice and training camp because of a July 4th of July firework incident. The dude, they haven't even shown photos of this guy without glasses on. That seems pretty sketchy. I mean, we've already seen not that efficient running backs like J.K. Dobbins off of some injuries actually produce as a top 20 running back in this offense last year. I think Omarion Hampton, who is a extreme talent, can be a top 12 back. Now, if you want to see where all these running backs we've talked about so far in a bunch of different positions are ranked and my top 50 overall rankings that will help you dominate your drafts, just check it out completely free, link down below, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. You can type it in on your phone right now, fantasyrankingsfree.com, and I'll send it to you. That will take you to this page where you enter your email and then you instantly get sent the top 50 overall rankings. It'll break it down. Be sure to check your spam and especially your promotional folders. Sometimes it gets lost in there for people is what I found, but it'll send you the top 50 overall rankings, ranked, tiered, and it'll highlight in green and red the best and worst values in each range. But if you're a serious fantasy player, and by the time you're watching this, you might have some drafts going on right now or very soon, and you want my full top 250 rankings to take care of your entire draft, all my other drafting tools and my in-season tools from draft day to championship week to help you win your league, that's exactly why I built the Fantasy Blueprint. It's what I use in all my leagues, and it's what over 10,000 people are currently using in their leagues right now. To learn more about the Blueprint, you can click the link in the description below, which takes you to this page, or you can type in jointheblueprint.com. That is jointheblueprint.com into your browser. You can learn more about everything you get in the Blueprint and all that, next steps, all this right here. You can read all the reviews from people as well that had it last year and are back this year. Over 85% of people, nearly 9 out of 10 people who were on the Blueprint last year are back this year, which I think is just the best metric to basically show you, like, yeah, 9 out of 10 people said it was valuable for them last year and they're back this year. It's probably a good product. So if you want to schmack around your friends in fantasy this year, there are limited spots available for the Blueprint. We just had to open up some more spots. Go ahead and check it out at jointheblueprint.com. It's also linked up down below. Now we get to a pretty big tier 4 of running backs here. I think you could take these guys honestly interchangeably. My number 13 overall player at the running back position this year is going to be Kyren Williams, and we kind of got to break this down overall. He led every single running back last year in red zone touches, more than Saquon Barkley, more than Bijan Robinson. And this is just a guy who over the last couple of seasons, like as you can see the tweet from NFL Plus says right here, he knows how to find the end zone. The most touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, tied with Jahmyr Gibbs with 31. That's more than Derrick Henry, more than Jalen Hurts, who's just scoring, a dozen to 13 to last year 14 touchdowns a season. And this is a guy in Kyren Williams who Sean McVay over the past couple of seasons, whether reports have stated he doesn't want to use him as much or not, continues to just get a ton of work because that's who McVay has trusted. Led the NFL with 88% snap share last year. His 83% opportunity share was number 2 in the league. This has been a guy who's been so dominant for this team that they said, you know what, we're going to go out and pay him early. He signs a 3-year deal with $23 million guaranteed. It's an extension here. Nothing crazy. He's entering his prime at 25 years old. He's not known as like the best pass catching running back, the most athletic running back, but he's just been able to get it done in the Sean McVay system. And that's proven right here because over the past 2 years since kind of stealing Cam Akers' job a couple of years ago, like week 1 or week 2 and never looking back, he has the 3rd most rushing yards, 2nd most rushing touchdowns, 3rd most yards after contact, 2nd most first downs. What do they pay running backs for in the NFL? To pick up first downs and to score touchdowns, and he ranks 2nd in both those categories the last 2 years. So like, I know we've been critical of Kyren Williams on this channel heading into this season, but that definitely does not mean that he's not worth like a 3rd round fantasy pick. I just don't like taking him in the 2nd round because there is new running back competition there. And the team did bring in Davante Adams, who, like this dude we just mentioned, Kyren Williams, 22-6. So let's pull it up. These 26 rushing touchdowns the last 2 seasons, Kyren's entire profile on fantasy largely revolves around this because he's not getting a ton of efficiency. He's not seeing a ton of targets, especially last year. So if you're bringing in Davante Adams, one of the best red zone targets in NFL history probably, he's probably going to take away a couple of those opportunities. And oh yeah, Puka Nacua is still there. So if this just drops down to, 13 touchdowns per year the past 2 seasons on the ground, if that drops down to like 8 or 9, now you're really a little bit concerned about a 2nd round pick on Kyren Williams. That's not where I like him. I like him as a late 3rd round pick. He just doesn't happen to go there often. And I could say similar things about my running back 14 this year, James Cook. We've been critical of him on this channel. He finished as a top 12 running back last year, but the crazy part is he had 18 touchdowns. You're going to tell me you score 18 touchdowns and you're not even a top 10 running back in fantasy? Why is that? Well, the reason is he didn't even play 50% of the snaps on his team. He didn't even lead the backfield in receiving yards. That was Ty Johnson. There was 3 running backs involved and Josh Allen, who we know is a mobile runner in the red zone. But that doesn't take away from the fact that James Cook is in a good offense. And as you can see right here, expected points added, his efficiency was number 3 in the NFL amongst running backs. He's one of the best running backs in between the 20s. But when it gets down to the red zone, yes, he had 18 touchdowns last year, but he's not seeing a ton of red zone touches. Josh Allen's taking those. He's not seeing a lot of targets. If he stops seeing these 30-plus yard runs that lead to explosive plays, which are hard to continue in the NFL, unless you're Saquon Barkley, well, he's probably going to drop. So as a 3rd round pick, I don't like him. When he starts to fall into round 4, that's better. Which is similar to where I like my number 15 overall running back, and that's Breece Hall. He finished as the RB17 last year in fantasy in a bottom 3 offense with no offensive line and a brutal schedule, and now we're hoping that this year some things can turn around. Because we basically just saw the floor for him last year. Sure, people spent the first round pick on him, but the RB17 overall for that situation, that was the floor, the absolute bottom. But now there's a new offensive line there. He gets Justin Fields, a mobile runner who might not check it down as much, but this stat from Derek Brown over the last 4 years might think otherwise here, that Justin Fields is ranked 2nd, 5th, 31st, and 11th highest in the NFL in checkdown rates. I think part of this has to do with terrible offensive lines he's played behind. Part of it has to do with his reluctancy to throw downfield up until last year with the Steelers and the schemes that he's been in. I don't think that he's necessarily a checkdown artist. We still know that he's a very mobile quarterback. I mean, the year that he actually got to take off, he was 31st in checkdown rate for a reason. And I think the Jets, who invested 2 years in him in a decent contract, guaranteed money as well, are going to use his legs. So I do think there's a little bit of concern from a target share perspective for Breece Hall, but I do think that in general, he's the RB1 in this backfield. Braylon Allen coming on a little bit lately in camp has me pushing Breece Hall for maybe like a week or two where he would have been my RB13 to start this tier ahead of Kyron, a couple of spots down. But again, all these guys in this tier are basically interchangeable. That's why it's called a tier, and these are my rankings within that. Now for my running back 16, it has to be Kenneth Walker. He was a top 12 running back last year in fantasy points per game, despite dealing with injuries for like half the season. But if you were to just look for those first 12 weeks of the season and really the first 9 games for Kenneth Walker during this time where he was healthy, you could see what he did. He averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game on over 17 touches per game. He had elite tackle breaking metrics, basically up there as number 1 or number 2 in the league. And according to RotoViz, from his receiving yards and rushing yards per game, the dude was averaging 85 total yards per game. So for those first 12 weeks of the season, 9 of which said he was fully healthy, he was easily a top 10 running back in the NFL, probably closer to top 5. And I know a lot of people will point out that Zach Charbonnet is somebody who's threatening in this backfield. There's a new offensive coordinator there, and all this new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, has said is Kenneth Walker. Here and there as like a back burner question about Zach Charbonnet, but he's just been hyping up Kenneth Walker, and Seattle insiders, people that are close to the team and have inside information, have been like, yeah, Kenneth Walker's a workhorse back. And it's pretty simple because the past has showed us that. Zach Charbonnet didn't see more than 12 touches in a single game that Kenneth Walker played all of last year. The same was true the season before that. So you're talking about when Kenneth Walker is active, even in blowouts, Zach Charbonnet is not seeing 10 or more touches in those games. He's operating as a clear backup, and I believe that will be the case while and if, knock on wood, Kenneth Walker remains healthy this year. Now for my running back 17 is Chuba Hubbard, who quietly averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game from week 2 on last year, which was the exact same as Josh Jacobs, who everybody is trying to take in the 2nd or 3rd rounds of drafts, yet Chuba Hubbard falls to like the 5th round often. Despite Chuba Hubbard ranking highly in so many categories, he was number 6 in breakaway run rates. If you're talking about his efficiency, he was top 5 in juke rate, broken tackle rates, his yards after contact, his dominator rating, which means how much of the production he had for his team overall from rushing, receiving, and touchdowns. He was top 10 in that category, and this was in a Panthers offense that didn't hit its stride till the second half of the season, but Hubbard was like the only guy producing also in the first half. As you can see right here, Jacob Gibbs on Twitter is a great follow. The Panthers offense in 2024, you can see they ranked 25th in efficiency per dropback, not great, and 24th in efficiency per dropback when Chuba Hubbard was not running the ball. But when Chuba Hubbard ran the ball, they were 4th in the NFL in efficiency per running play. So without Chuba Hubbard running the ball, so other backups, or if Hubbard missed time, they were 24th, one of the worst teams in the NFL, and then went to one of the best when Hubbard was in there. That's because he was highly efficient. And here's another cool stat from Fantasy Points data, most valuable roles last year that they point to, and this just basically says highest expected fantasy points per your team's play, so how much you were involved in your team. You could see number 1 in terms of running backs, Alvin Kamara, which makes sense because there was no other producers on this team once Chris Olave went down. Number 2 was Chuba Hubbard. He was ahead of guys like Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson and Joe Mixon, who had one of the best seasons before injury last year. So this is a guy in Chuba Hubbard who was highly underrated. Some people might call him a quote-unquote dead zone back. He popped off for 1 year. Now he's not going to be anything like guys like Mike Davis, Peyton Hillis in the past. I don't really believe that. I think Hubbard is talented. This guy had over 2,000 yards in college, and now he's finally in a good offensive system. I also think that Alvin Kamara is talented as my RB18 this year. I'm just not willing to spend a 4th round pick on him. I think maybe end of the 5th, early 6th round is okay, because look, this is a guy who last year had, once again, 89 targets. He ranked top 5 as a running back because the dude just kept catching passes, and he was a priority for his offense because there was nobody else there once Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed went down in the earlier parts of the year. But the concern for me for Alvin Kamara is he's another year older, and eventually the wheels are going to fall off at age 30. That's usually a cliff. The offense looks terrible. They don't have a quarterback at this point. They have 3 that none of them look all that great. The offense around him doesn't look that great. And this tweet from Ron Stewart, you can check him out on Twitter, is also interesting. Alvin Kamara, the last 3 seasons, 2022 to 2024. So this is his age 28 to 30 season as he's gotten older. To start the year, he starts hot, 20.3 fantasy points per game. But over the final 10 games of the season or so, final 7 to 10 games, just 14.6 fantasy points per game. So he starts the season being a top 5 fantasy running back the last 3 years. He ends the season being barely in the top 20. Part of that is because the offense gets hurt. It falls off the track. Part of that is because his older body breaks down, like it did last year when he suffered an injury at the end of the season. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm going all in on Kamara as a 4th round pick. My next guy up, I do think James Conner is nicely valued as like a round 5 or round 6 pick this year. He just had a career year, I would argue, at age 29 last year, where he finally played 16 games and he remained healthy. As you can see right here, James Conner over 1,000 rushing yards. When you factor in his receiving yards last year of 414, this guy had nearly 1,500 total yards, 9 touchdowns, was number 1 in juke rate last year, and he averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game now in 5 of his last 6 seasons. Since he's joined the Cardinals, he's just been the dude in the backfield. I know Trey Benson is there. He's getting nice reviews this year as he enters training camp. This is still James Conner's backfield. He's the clear RB1 as long as he remains healthy. He's kind of a running back that I target. Say you go hero RB, like you get a Christian McCaffrey or a Bijan Robinson in round 1. You come back around in like round 2 and 3 and you get some wide receivers. Maybe you get an elite quarterback like a Jalen Hurts in round 4. Then in round 5 or 6, if James Conner is your RB2, a guy that like, okay, even if he has a quote unquote down season of only like 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, he's your RB2. But if he just does what he's been doing, I'll take 15 fantasy points per game. Outproduces that a little bit like he did last year with almost 1,500 yards. I'll take that as my RB2. Now, before we get into tier 5, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds of your time. And this time of the year right now, a lot of you are probably tuning in because it's the fantasy season. This is when we really grow our subscriber base. I'm pushing for 200,000, helps more people see it, and it really helps this channel grow. So I appreciate it if you take 2 seconds of your time, if you're finding this helpful, to hit that subscribe button. Now we kick off tier 5 with my running back 20, and that is going to be TreVeyon Henderson, the rookie for the New England Patriots, 2nd round pick, because this guy was the only running back last year in college to have 1,000 rushing yards, over 200 receiving yards, and average a very impressive 7 yards per carry. And oh yeah, he also had 667 college touches and 0 fumbles and only 2 drops in his college career. He's young, he's explosive, he's productive. In my opinion, he's the best running back in this backfield. He's just breaking away right now in training camp in terms of his pass protection and how good he looks, especially in inter squad scrimmages. I think he's easily ahead of Antonio Gibson in terms of like depth chart right away. I do think Ramondre Stevenson is somebody, a bigger back who can catch passes, although he did deal with fumbling issues last year. I do think Ramondre can stay on the field for those first 4 to 6 weeks and kind of take touches away from Henderson, but at some point Henderson is just going to be undeniable, like a Bucky Irving last year, like a Chase Brown last year. He's an explosive young player, which an offense like the Patriots need. I think you're going to see 16 to 18 touches per game at some point this year. And I can honestly say the same about my running back 21, RJ Harvey, who's just been honestly a force in my opinion. Also got 2nd round draft capital to land on a Sean Payton offense, which averages a top 12 fantasy running back in his entire career as a head coach, Sean Payton. We like that. And we like some of these reports about RJ Harvey in terms of his production. Coming out of the draft, you could see Dan Brugler, who is a top prospect, said don't sleep on RJ Harvey. He led all running backs in 10 or more yard carries the last 2 seasons ahead of Ashton Jeanty. 20 or more yard carries, he was tied with Ashton Jeanty, and only behind Ashton Jeanty the last 2 years in college with just 4 less rushing touchdowns. So this is a guy who was dominant in college and production-wise. He has a nice size. He went to the combine and looked good, and then he got the draft capital in the 2nd round with limited competition in Denver. Now I know J.K. Dobbins is there, and there was a recent report like, oh, RJ Harvey's the RB5 on the depth chart. They'll pay attention to those. The team doesn't put those together. The PR department does, usually by seniority. It has nothing to do with performance or projection. And I thought this was a good tweet by Dave FF Stallion over on Twitter. He said, here is the 2017 New Orleans Saints first depth chart. They had Alvin Kamara in that season was last on the depth chart. If you pull it up right here as running backs on the depth chart, Mark Ingram, Adrian Peterson, look at these other names, Travarius Cadet, Daniel Lasco, and then Alvin Kamara. So Alvin Kamara was also the RB5 on that depth chart. You know what he ended up doing that season? He was the RB3 overall in PPR formats for fantasy in the Sean Payton offense. Do not overreact to RJ Harvey being the RB5 on the depth chart. He's not. Sean Payton loves him. At worst, he's the RB1B and going to see a dozen plus touches right away. Now for my running back 22 is DeAndre Swift. And honestly, this one can change a lot. He has a very volatile ranking because there's a couple of things to like. He had nearly 1,400 total yards, a career year last year behind one of the worst offensive lines with terrible coaching and kind of a gross offense in general. They just never got it going besides Swift in the Bears backfield. And now he gets a massive upgrade on the offensive line. They get Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, Drew Thalman. This was the most improved offensive line according to PFF this offseason. They also get Ben Johnson. Now they get some guys in terms of Caleb Williams entering year 2 to help him in Colston Loveland and Luther Burton. The offense in general looks a lot better. Seems like Ben Johnson is running a serious or a more serious training camp this year than past years for the Bears. So yeah, I do think DeAndre Swift is the RB1. Now I know there's been some reports like Kyle Monangai is getting first team reps and people are jumping up and down about Kyle Monangai, and maybe by the time you're watching this, like he's gotten more preseason usage with the first team offense. I'll stay hesitant as a 7th round pick, although I will say all the reports have been great. He has the size, he has the speed, he was productive in college as well, right? He's coming out of college, I believe, from Rutgers. This is a guy that you can really lean into if indeed he does start to see those first first team reps as a guy who will see more usage than Roschon and push a DeAndre Swift, because this backfield is for the most part for the taking. But we can't ignore that DeAndre Swift had almost 1,400 yards and a terrible offense with a bad offensive line last year. I think he's still the RB1, and as of right now, worthy of a top 24 RB pick. Which takes me to my running back 23 in David Montgomery, and this is a guy who has finished as a top 16 running back in fantasy in 4 out of the last 5 seasons, and during that time, he's averaged 16 touches per game, he's averaged 12 rushing touchdowns per season, and that's exactly why I'm just not in on Montgomery this year. He is so touchdown reliant. We talked about it earlier with Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is starting to see more usage right now. Ben Johnson is gone. The offensive line is worse. Those rushing touchdowns are going to be harder to come by, especially if you're losing snaps to Jahmyr Gibbs, which as of right now in training camp, that's what they're suggesting is going to be the case. If Monty doesn't get a dozen touchdowns this year, let's just say he has a decent year where he only has 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns, nowhere near worthy of where he currently goes in drafts. My running back 24 is another rookie. This is the tier of rookies in Caleb Johnson, because this is a guy who's filling in for Najee Harris. 300 touches are up for grabs or opportunities in this backfield. And Caleb Johnson, he just has the breakaway speed based on running 22 miles per hour taped in college that Najee Harris never had in this offense. Like, there were runs last year and definitely years before from Najee Harris where, oh, he's out in open space, he's running for 15 or 20 yards and that's all he got. Okay, well, if that's Caleb Johnson, it might be 40 plus yards and a touchdown, because Caleb Johnson is a certified beast. 23 touchdowns last year at Iowa, over 1,500 rushing yards. He was this entire offense, right? And now he's going into the exact role most likely that Najee Harris had, of nearly 300 touches last year, 55 red zone looks as well. A team that loves to run the ball. In terms of overall running the ball last year, 31 times per game is what they were running, and now with a 3rd round pick investment, didn't have a 2nd round pick, so maybe they even take Caleb Johnson earlier if they had that 2nd round pick. I think they're going to invest in running the ball. In terms of the depth charts, once again, Jaylen Warren was listed as a starter. Do not look into that right now. Caleb Johnson, by all accounts, even if the preseason usage isn't overwhelmingly to Caleb Johnson, I think at some point and probably right away by week 1, he's seeing 15 carries if they're in a positive to neutral game script. And anytime that they are in positive to neutral game scripts, meaning they're not trailing by more than 7 points, I think you're going to see Caleb Johnson seeing 15 to 16 plus touches a game. Now, before we get into the next running back in the rankings, and this is going to start a whole new tier, I have to point out just how important the elite pass catching running backs are in PPR formats, especially ones like DraftKings Best Ball. Because earlier we talked about Devon Achane in these rankings. We had him as a top 10 running back, and over on DraftKings Best Ball, he goes as a 2nd round pick, a 15th overall pick, and this makes sense. I mean, this is a guy who led, like we said, the NFL in running back receptions last year with 78. But I think there's a case to be made that on a platform, a PPR platform, and that's the key here, like DraftKings Best Ball, Achane should probably go a little bit earlier ahead of a guy like Derrick Henry, who is not known as a pass-catching running back. If you're going to tell me that Achane, especially with Jonnu Smith gone, is going to have the potential to catch another 70 or more balls, that just sets him so much more apart from guys who don't catch passes like Derrick Henry. I mean, if you just look at Devon Achane last season, he ended up finishing, if we pull it up over here, let's pull it up right now, he ended up finishing as the running back 6 overall in fantasy points per game. 1 spot behind Derrick Henry, despite having 1,014 less rushing yards. Let me say that again. He had 1,014 less rushing yards than Derrick Henry and only finished 1 spot behind Henry in fantasy points per game because of those receptions. That's how important they are on PPR formats like DraftKings Best Ball. Now, I'm teaming up with DraftKings this year, and we've been doing live drafts on the platform, and just a week ago, I took Devon Achane in the 2nd round ahead of Derrick Henry. And if you're not familiar, DraftKings Best Ball is a fantasy game type where you draft your team once, no waivers, no trades, and no setting your lineups. And that's what makes DraftKings Best Ball so fun. It is literally, in my opinion, the best part of fantasy when you get to draft your team, and then after that, you just watch it ride. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that, especially, we kind of talked about it earlier, taking like a Devon Achane over a Derrick Henry in those PPR formats, because it is so important on certain platforms or certain league settings. Some things will change. Now we're going to go ahead and get into tier 6, where it starts off with my running back 25, Isaiah Pacheco, who is somebody who last season looked like he dealt with injuries. He looked like he was going to have all the usage right away to start the season. Then he came back and he was just never the same. It's lucky that he came back in general. But over the past 2 seasons, if you look at the games where he's played at least 60% of the snaps and he was healthy, Pacheco averages 18.4 fantasy points per game, 21 touches per game, and 109 total yards per game. Yeah, you heard that right. When this guy's healthy, playing at least 60% of the snaps, he's averaging over 100 yards per game and nearly, 19 fantasy points per game. And in terms of the competition right now, like, there's not much, as Chris Wetch points out right here. Chiefs don't really have much at running back behind Pacheco. Hunt has no juice yet, according to the training camp reports. Mitchell doesn't look all that explosive. Maybe he gets used on 3rd downs. And Brashad Smith is getting a lot of hype because of this, because people love latching themselves onto these deep sleeper 7th round running backs, right? Because Isaiah Pacheco worked out once, and years ago James Robinson worked out. But he's saying that Brashad Smith's still learning the playbook as a receiving hybrid role, not a pure runner. So it looks like as long as Pacheco is healthy, and what we're hoping is an improved offensive line with Josh Simmons looking awesome in camp, Fant, their first round pick, yeah, I think Pacheco as a top 25 running back makes sense. My running back 26 is Aaron Jones because he quietly had the second most total yards of his career last year while turning 30 years old. I mean, let's just look at it. Aaron Jones last season had over 1,100 rushing yards. He had over 400 receiving yards, 1,500 total yards, 62 touches, 255 or 62 targets, 255 carries. I mean, the guy was super productive, and now he gets, we're hoping, a quarterback in J.J. McCarthy who brings some mobility, who could lead this offense similar to Sam Darnold did last year to be a top offense, and has a way better offensive line, still has Kevin O'Connell calling the offense there as well. You could see the improvements to the offensive line. First round pick Donovan Jackson. They go out and get Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. Okay, you're going to get Christian Darrisaw back from injury, but you can also see that they brought in Jordan Mason here. And there have been reports most of this offseason that the 49ers former running back Jordan Mason has been the 1B for them. And that's what Kevin O'Connell has called him. He's been calling him the 1B, saying that he could take the goal line situations, the goal to go situations as well, giving Aaron Jones a breather. There's been another report that this could be a 50-50 backfield. So that is the one pause with Aaron Jones. Not only is he now 30 years old, which we see in the data at age 30 and 32, running backs do hit cliffs in fantasy, but there is a legit competition piece in this backfield. Now for my running back 27, and it's Tony Pollard. Now, believe it or not, Tony Pollard is one of just 2 running backs over the last 2 seasons to have at least 300 touches in each of those seasons. The only other running back was Derrick Henry. There's some fantasy draft trivia you can tell your friends. And you want to tell your friends it because maybe that'll make them draft Tony Pollard, even though he's going grossly earlier than he should, in my opinion. The old bait and switch, because Tony Pollard, look, he only had 5 touchdowns on 300 touches last year. Part of that is his offense. Part of that is his inability to score in the red zone, which has been the case most of his career. But now he's going to go into an offense where we're hoping the offensive line's a little bit better, healthier, rebuilt. Younger guys can get more experience. Number 1 overall pick Cam Ward. So things should be getting better, but he still has to compete with Tyjae Spears, who is in his backfield, younger, more explosive, on a per game basis, when healthier, more productive. So that would be my concern. And the offensive coordinator and the coach have already said, like, yeah, we want Tyjae Spears to be more involved in this offense. We want this to be a 50-50 backfield, yet you can get Tyjae Spears 5 rounds later. So I'd rather just take Tyjae Spears, who we'll talk about later in this video, as a value compared to Tony Pollard. Now for my running back 28, we talked about him earlier briefly discussing Aaron Jones, and that's Jordan Mason. Yes, he's getting very close in the rankings, just 1 spot apart from Aaron Jones at this point, because this is a guy last year who, when he played at least 50% of the snaps, he was averaging over 15 fantasy points per game and over 100 rushing yards per game. I don't know if I said when he played over 15%. It should have been 50%. Maybe I said that. I don't know. We've been saying a lot. This has been a longer video if you haven't noticed. And to start the season before an injury, a shoulder injury last year, Jordan Mason was a monster filling in for the injured Christian McCaffrey. Over those 5 games, 17 fantasy points per game, 107 rushing yards per game, was number 2 in the NFL. He led the NFL in rush attempts per game. He was top 3 in broken tackle rate. He was an absolute beast. Then the 49ers, they traded him to the Minnesota Vikings, who said, yeah, we noticed that. We'll trade for him and we'll extend him to a contract despite a really good running back draft coming up. Now we'd rather have Jordan Mason, and now they're saying he's going to be in a split backfield. So I think Jordan Mason is honestly a very good play in terms of like all the upside in the world. If you just draft him, he'll probably be a nice pick. If Aaron Jones goes down, he'll be a home run pick. My running back 29 is Brian Robinson, running back 15 in points per game before his own injury last year in week 5. Now he's entering a contract year. The offensive line should be better with Laramie Tunsil. If Brian Robinson stays healthy, this is one of those running backs in the Jaden Daniels-led offense. Should be a good offense. Debo was brought in. I assume they get the McLaurin contract done maybe by the time that you're watching this. Robinson could threaten for like 10 to 12 touchdowns. And he's going late enough in drafts as like a 7th or 8th round pick usually to where I'm okay spending a pick on him. I don't think he's flashy. I don't think he's going to win you your leagues. But at that point, if he's like the RB2 on your roster, then sure. Now my running back 30 is Joe Mixon. And this is an interesting one because he was a top 10 running back in points per game last year. He kind of fell off towards the end of the season. And now he dealt with an injury last year to the foot. He's been dealing with it in the preseason. They're saying it's a non-football injury to his foot. So apparently this happened not on the football field. In the latest update we got that there was no timeline for a return. Now maybe by the time you're watching this, there has been a timeline for his return, but it is a little bit sketchy, which has had him go from like a 4th round pick in fantasy, plummeting all the way down to a live draft on Best Ball recently. I got him in like the 9th round. But I will say there's not really competition if Joe Mixon is indeed healthy week 1, which is what the Texans have been saying for most part of training camp. He's going to be healthy against the Rams. Nick Chubb at this point, battling his own injuries here and there in camp, not concerned about him at this point in his career. Woody Marks is a nice pass catching running back, but overall not concerned. Dameon Pierce missed the first 2 weeks of camp, came back. We'll see if there's anything left in Dameon Pierce, who did not do anything last year either. So in an offense that needed a running back to step up. So look, Joe Mixon, when Joe Mixon was out, Joe Mixon, like, yes, the injury right now is scary. And based on this injury with no timeline, there's no way I was taking him in the 4th or 5th round. But if he's going to fall all the way to the 8th or 9th round, sure. Now that takes me to tier 7. And this is the tier of guys who are just in split backfields. And I think they have the most upside of the guys in split backfields, if you will. We'll start it off with my running back 31, Travis Etienne, who he was an RB1 in 2023. Then last year, it was just gross. The running back 37, only 2 touchdowns, only 150 carries. He was averaging like 30 rushing yards per game. Disgusting. And it's hard to get overly excited about Etienne when reports like this are coming out that the Jaguars plan to keep 4 running backs on the roster and use a committee approach. Etienne in the screen game, Tank Bigsby as a physical short yardage guy, Baishal Tutin as a home run hitter, LaQuinn Allen as a third down back. I don't actually think they're going to do this, but it just goes to show you a lot of running backs are going to be involved. That's why I said these are the guys in committees that I think have upside. I will just say that Etienne is probably the most explosive guy with experience. Like, we'll see what happens with Baishal Tutin if he can actually get on the field. So he's going to be the guy right now as the veteran, ranked higher. I think he has more juice than Bigsby and just more experience as of now than Baishal Tutin. And that experience is important because that's what coaches trust. That's why I bring that up. Running back 32 is Jaylen Warren. We talked about him when we were discussing the backfield with Caleb Johnson. There are 299 touches up for grabs. I do think with Najee gone, most of those just plug and play, go to one, Caleb Johnson, but maybe some go to Warren, who has been quietly one of the most efficient running backs when healthy in the NFL. Check this out. Over the last 2 years, Warren ranks top 10 in yards per touch, juke rate, and yards created. The concerns, though, for Warren is that he's just like a pass-catching running back who lacks a lot of big play upside, and even in the past when they've tried to give him more touches, Najee has stayed healthy, but when they try and give him more touches, or Najee has been dealing with like a Liz Frank injury and not fully there, Warren just hasn't been able to step up. Then there's my running back 33, Cam Skattebo, who put up over 2,300 yards last year in college. He was an absolute monster. If we pull it up right here, you can see that overall production, 1,700 rushing yards, a beast. And then you can see right here, 24 touchdowns, 600 receiving yards, second most amongst running backs in college last year. He also went out there and threw for what? He dropped like 99 receiving yards. He dropped a passing touchdown as well. And I don't say dropped, like he threw one. He dropped it in the bucket in the college football playoff of 40 plus yards. Now his competition, and if you're reading into the depth chart, he's the RB3 on the depth chart. Okay, I think Devin Singletary is a nice veteran, but there's a chance he's a cut candidate. Although Brian Dable does like him from their years together at Buffalo. We'll see what happens there. Tyron Tracy did have a nice stretch down the end of the season last year, but did also have fumbling issues. His efficiency was very hit or miss. Cam Skattebo, a bigger back. I think it's going to be a split backfield. If I had to pick one of these guys in this backfield, which we're hoping the offensive line can improve this year, I would take by mid-season for one guy to break out, I would take Cam Skattebo. Now, I also think my running back 34 is pretty appealing because look at this. I think it's J.K. Dobbins. We talked about R.J. Harvey earlier, but if you're going to get J.K. Dobbins in like round 10 or later of your fantasy drafts, and all the reports right now about J.K. Dobbins are that he looks healthy. Like he finally looks healthy off of the Achilles and the ACLs and all these other injuries that he had. And he began to show this last year when he averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game, right? He had 905 rushing yards. He ended up having 9 touchdowns overall in just the 13 games that he played. Now, of course, he's going to have to compete with the guy on this channel that we like more, the second round rookie in R.J. Harvey, who I think is probably at this point in their careers just better than J.K. Dobbins basically everywhere except pass protection. And that could be the reason that Dobbins does see an extra, 5-6 plus snaps a game, which leads to an extra 1-2 touches a game, which leads to an extra 20 to 30 overall touches on the season, and that will eventually add up. But just in general, in round 10 or 11, and maybe RJ Harvey on the off chance, I think it is an off chance that he just doesn't pan out in the NFL, well, now Dobbins is a lead back and what is an ascending offense behind maybe a top 2 or 3 offensive line in football. My running back 35 is Zach Charbonnet because he's just basically one of the best handcuffs in football. We've seen it the past 2 years when Kenneth Walker misses time. Zach Charbonnet is a top 10 running back in fantasy football week in and week out. We saw that last season when Charbonnet averaged 19.2 fantasy points, over 100 yards, and 1 touchdown per game with Kenneth Walker out of the lineup. He's a premium handcuff running back that we're in this range of the draft outside the top 30 running backs where you're looking for premium handcuffs, or if the starter goes down, guys have upside. That's the definition of Zach Charbonnet. And for my running back 36, the other running back in that backfield for the Giants is Tyron Tracy, who we talked about it last year. I mean, this is a guy in Tyron Tracy who, when he was on the field, when he actually got that usage on that primetime game, I think it was a Sunday night football game, you can see right here from that point on, his final 13 games of the season, 13.5 fantasy points per game between his receiving yards of 18, rushing yards of 62. He was averaging 80 yards per game, but he also ended up fumbling the ball 5 times, losing 2 of those fumbles, including one in overtime, which cost his team the game. And now you get Cam Skattebo, who's probably just a better pass catching running back, even though Tyron Tracy was like this hybrid wide receiver in college. I would say that Cam Skattebo as a running back, like running the running back routes, is a better pass catching running back, is a better short yardage back as well. So this is a situation where if I have to choose between the two of them, we already chose Cam Skattebo, but I won't ignore the fact that Tyron Tracy was explosive for stretches last year in a bad offense, which keeps him as a top 36 running back here. So there you go. What a long video. Might be the longest video we've done so far this year, maybe ever. The top 36 running backs for this season. But if you want to see where my top 50 players across all positions are ranked, make sure to get the free rankings at fantasyrankingsfree.com or with the link in the description below. And if you want to see the tight ends you should be drafting this year, because most people are drafting the position completely wrong, well, be sure to check out this video right here. It'll show you exactly how you should be drafting the tight ends this season.